Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we'll discuss 7 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your analysis section, which also provide you the much important avenue to practice daily answer writing, in the first topic, we are going to analyze how the global supply networks for critical minerals are highly concentrated and increasingly subjected to export controls. Then, in the second topic, we'll try to assess that how our export sector is basically concentrated in few coastal states of the country. Then from your simplified section, we'll take up 5 news. We will not only try to simplify the news for you, but also provide you the much important value addition, keeping in mind the approaching prelims 2026. So stay tuned. Where the Chief of Integrated Defense Staff has raised the issue of geopolitical dimension of mineral supply chains, citing that how such global supply networks for critical minerals are not only highly concentrated but also increasingly subjected to export control. So, in the context of your GS3 paper, under the theme of energy security, first we are going to assess whether the supply chain of such critical minerals are really concentrated in the hands of few countries, and then second, by the very virtue of such extravagant control, how such countries who dominate the supply chain of critical minerals actually cut down the export to the import dependent countries, thus strangling their energy security and energy sector, like for example India. So, first question which shall arise in your mind at this stage should be, what are these critical minerals? Critical minerals like for example cobalt, nickel, copper, lithium, etc. are natural reserves where they basically act as a kind of a raw material for the manufacturing of components, equipments, as well as the machinery for various industries. In the words of the Air Marshal Ashutosh Dikshit, such critical minerals are crucial for not only national security but also for defense capability development as well as technological sovereignty. So, there was basically a kind of a discussion which was taking place titled Minerals That Matter, Geopolitics, Sovereignty and Value Chains, where our Air Marshal underscored the role of such critical minerals in the modern defense system, such as for example jet engines, missiles, precision munitions, radars, satellites, batteries as well as semiconductor. So, are these critical minerals really so important in our defense sector? Let's first try to assess that. What are the use of such critical minerals in the defense sector? So for example, there are critical minerals like neodymium and dysprosium, which actually are useful to provide high strength magnets for motors in drones, guidance systems in missiles and radars. Titanium, which is actually effectively used as a strong and lightweight metal for aircraft, engines as well as to create armor. Tungsten, which is used in the armor piercing projectiles due to its high density. Your cobalt, lithium, nickel, which is crucial for advanced batteries which power electronics, electric vehicles as well as various military hardware. Or for example your copper, which is essential for the electronics and electromagnetic protections in the ships as well as aircraft. Or your semiconductors like for example gallium and germanium, which are effectively and largely used for the electronic warfare system. When we have established the importance of such critical minerals specifically in our defense sector, don't you think the direct implication of that is that these critical minerals are sine qua non to ensure the security and the sovereignty of the country? In this particular case, we can actually take up the Hoffman analysis. According to the Hoffman analysis of the future warfare is actually going to be established on 3 important pillars. The first is going to be precision technology, the second is going to be cyber warfare and the third is going to be media manipulation. The first 2 components, precision technology and cyber warfare, a great example of that was actually very recently showcased in the Operation Sindoor, which was launched by India in response to the Pahalgam attack by the Pakistan. where, as you guys can see in the picture, a red trail is actually seen in the night sky as India's air defense system intercepts aerial objects during a suspected drone attack from the Pakistan side. What are these drones? The kind of the integral component of the future warfare. What are they made up of? They are made up of copper, carbon fiber, aluminium, plastic, lithium ion and silicon. All of these which are basically very integral critical minerals. Also, these critical minerals are very important pillar of not only our energy security but also to achieve our national goals which we have taken at the international forum. For example, you guys might be aware about the National Hydrogen Mission, which was launched by our country to actually produce what? Green hydrogen. So under the National Hydrogen Mission, we are basically envisaging to produce 5 million metric ton of green hydrogen by the year of 2030. And this green hydrogen is an integral component of our larger renewable energy basket. To produce this green hydrogen, we basically require electrolyzer. Electrolyzer which basically kinds of bifurcate the water molecule or H2O into hydrogen at the cathode and oxygen at the anode level. What are these electrolyzer made up of? These electrolyzer itself is made up of various critical minerals like for example nickel, titanium, copper, etc. All of this which again are critical minerals. Or for example, you guys can recall that how our country has taken an ambitious target that by the year of 2070 we are actually going to become carbon neutral. For which purpose? In the Conference of Party 26 of the United Nations Framework on Convention on Climate Change UNFCCC, which took place at Glasgow, our country basically adopted an ambitious Panch Amrit target. One important component of this Panch Amrit target is that by the year of 2030, we are going to produce 500 gigawatt of renewable energy. So to actually accelerate this particular ambitious target, our government basically brought Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, under which our government is saying that we are going to install 1 crore solar rooftop panel in the residential sector by the year of 2027. This was the exact statement which also reflected in your prelims examination 2025. So, when we are saying that we are going to install this rooftop solar panel, do you know that these photovoltaic solar panel basically consist of silicon? It is the silicon, a critical mineral which actually converts the solar energy into the renewable energy. Thus, as per the Global Critical Mineral Outlook 2024 report, which has been released by the International Energy Agency, these critical minerals are going to be a kind of a very important sector for any particular country in the future, and the demand for such critical minerals has already risen multifolds in the last few years. For example, the demand of lithium itself rose by 30% in 2023. Of nickel, cobalt and graphite and various other rare earth elements, their demand actually grew by 8 to 15%. And thus, these critical minerals were actually pegged at an aggregate value of $325 billion in the year of 2024. So when we have understood the kind of a paramount importance of these critical minerals not only for our energy security but also for the security and the sovereignty of the country in the defense sector as well, the question which shall arise in your mind is that how much self-sufficient our country is in the sector of critical mineral. So for this we refer to the data which has been provided to us by the Ministry of Mines data 2024, according to which in the year of 2024, there existed 1,319 mines in our country, of which 545 were metallic, for example, iron, gold, silver, etc. And 774 mines were non-metallic in the nature, such as, for example, coal, mica, etc. Thus, as this particular industry is of paramount importance, we can see that how India's mining GDP actually grew to 82,680 crore rupees in the year of 2024, contributing to almost 5 to 6% of the GDP, thus also providing employment to almost 11 million people. Keep this in mind that as per the Economic Survey of 2025, the agriculture sector provides employment to almost 46% of the total workforce in our country, and after that it is actually the mining sector which acts as the second largest employer. When it comes to our country's global standing in several critical minerals production, we rank second in crude steel, aluminium as well as coal, third in the production of limestone, and fourth in the production of iron ore. At this stage, also keep one very important data from the prelims perspective in your mind, that almost 44% of the mineral reserves which is produced in our country is actually extracted from the state of Odisha, followed by 17% which comes from Karnataka and 14% which comes from the state of Maharashtra. So if we look at the left side of the coin right now, it actually seems that we are very well sufficient in the critical minerals. However, if we refer to the Ministry of Mines report 2023, it says that how the Ministry of Mines basically identified 30 essential critical minerals in our country, of which we have as a country an import dependency of almost 10 minerals. So we are entirely import dependent for almost 10 critical minerals which are required for the Industry 4.0 of our country. Just look at this particular table. There are minerals, the importance which they have in the industrial sector, as well as the import dependency which we have. For example, bismuth, which we basically use in the pharmaceuticals and chemicals, we are import reliant for almost 85% of the source of it. Or we are 82% import dependent for lithium, which is extensively used in the creation of electric vehicle batteries or energy storage. 76% for the silicon, as you guys can recall from the Pradhan Mantri Surya Ghar Muft Bijli Yojana, which is used for the creation of semiconductor and solar panels. Or 50% for titanium, which has extensive use in aerospace and defense application, and 42% for tellurium, which is actually used in the kind of the change of the solar power as well as the thermoelectric devices. So when we have established that we are majorly an import dependent country when it comes to the critical mineral, another follow-up question can be that from where we are actually sourcing majority of these minerals from, and that is none other than our dear friend and dear neighbor China. So basically China's dominance in the mineral sector is unparalleled in the world, where in the recent few years, China has emerged the world's largest mining nation. In the year of 2024 itself, China identified almost 173 different type of mineral reserves, of which 13 of them are actually energy producing minerals and 59 of them are metallic minerals. For the exploration, excavation and make these minerals ready for the industrial purpose, China has invested a staggering $19.4 billion of investment. Keep this in mind, it is only 20 to 25 times higher than our country. Also, we can see this unparalleled dominance of China, which is reflected from certain facts and figures. For example, China dominates 87% of the rare earth element processing, constitutes 58% of the world's lithium refining, and almost 68% of the silicon processing. The question which shall be arising in your mind is, what are the causes for such high import dependency which we have on minerals on China? Why we are so much import reliant? For example, we are 85% almost import reliant when it comes to our crude oil need. But yes, we do not have reserves for crude oil. Is that the same case when it comes to critical minerals? As you guys can see from the heading itself, Ministry of Mines is saying that we have already identified the potential reserves of 30 essential critical minerals in our country. So the first major issue is the inadequate exploration and the tapping of the reserve. To understand that, we take up a case study of ilmenite. What is ilmenite? Ilmenite is basically an isotope of titanium oxide, a question which appeared in your prelims 2023 paper. So, as do we not have resources for ilmenite? Keep this in mind that ilmenite is basically extracted from two kinds of rocks, that is igneous and metamorphic rock. So from the use of your basic NCERTs of class 11th of geography, you guys can recall the kind of the large scale presence of igneous and metamorphic rocks which we have in our country. Thus, by the virtue of it, we possess 11% of the global reserves of ilmenite in our country, from where we can actually end up producing titanium oxide. But as you guys can recall from the previous table, we are 50% import reliant for titanium, which is very kind of integral part of our defense application and defense sector. Thus, we are actually kind of giving billions of dollars for the kind of the procurement of this titanium, which we can actually produce from ilmenite. The major reason for that is the inadequate exploration and tapping of reserve. And one of the major cause for that is the deep-seated minerals which we have. For example, any of these minerals are actually found in the deep layer of the crust of the earth. And for that purpose, you are actually required to do a kind of a large scale exploration and the mining projects which you need to establish, which eventually leads to high risk investment in exploration and mining. So for example, let's say there exists a particular block which we have identified, and there is a kind of a prospect that yes, indeed, here we can find the reserves of ilmenite. Let's say that this is a square area of 5 km square. So the first and foremost, you are actually required to do the kind of a survey of this particular area that yes, indeed, there exists the mineral. Then you need to prove that in this particular area there exists sufficient amount of mineral. The third kind of the step is to actually kind of identify the metal grade or the grade of the mineral reserve, that whether it is actually suitable for the industrial purpose or not, right? For all of this, keep this in mind that you require heavy technological upgradation. For example, you require aerial survey, geological mapping, geochemical analysis. So for example, let's say there were some scientists, they took this 5 km square area for exploration. They did all of this research for 3 years. After 3 years, they actually realized that no, there does not exist, let's say for example, a mineral reserve suitable for industrial purpose. They come out, they are like, Malik, thodi si galti ho gayi, right? So obviously, don't you think that will actually act as a kind of a huge deterrent to the incentive for the private sector investment in this particular region? Keep this in mind, a very important data, that only 1% of the explored projects in the world actually translates into commercially viable mines. And thus, because of these factors in our country, India has only explored 10% of its OGP. That is the obvious geological potential of mineral reserves which we have in our country. And of this 10% explored obvious geological potential, we have only mined 2% of the mineral reserves which are actually present in our country. A very important case study for that can also be the discovery of 5.9 million tons of lithium deposit which was found in the Jammu and Kashmir very recently. The whole country was celebrating that now we will not be required to import lithium from China. We have become, it was a kind of a eureka moment for us. However, even after 3 years of this news, till now, there not has been any potential private company which has kind of bid for the exploration in this particular region. Why? Because these lithium deposits are actually found in the kind of as a mixture of the clay deposit. And even the best technologies which we have, which is available in the world right now, they do not provide a solution for 100% extraction of mineral reserves from the clay deposit. So don't you think it is actually requires a huge amount of investment in research and development ecosystem? Then you guys can recall that how in our country it is a meager 0.7% of our GDP. So all of these issues have basically augmented, and thus our country remains a kind of a largely import dependent country when it comes to the critical mineral. If a student forget about having a kind of such in-depth understanding of this topic, even if there was a student who was reading only such headings, how India's reliance on China for critical mineral, or how India is endowed with 95 minerals but yet to establish a footprint in the critical mineral, that person would have been able to kind of eliminate this very easy second option which appeared in this year prelims examination, and thus you guys had a kind of a direct answer right in front of your eye. The UPSC examiner while creating this question was कि अब क्या बच्चे की जान लोगे? Thus, when we have established the import dependency, let's try to see how it actually kind of strangles our country's energy security as well as balance of payment. Just look at the first issue which starts arising, and that is the trade deficit. So as per the Global Trade Research Institute, China has a kind of a overwhelming dominance on the critical mineral supply, which we have already established, and that provides China a kind of a potential leverage against India, where it can turn its supply chains into a tool of pressure in times of political tension. So it can actually lead to various issues. For example, the first issue is the huge trade deficit which we are incurring with China. In the month of July 2025, our import from China stood at $113 billion, while we were exporting only $14.25 billion to China, thus kind of incurring a trade deficit of $99 billion in 2024. And the total amount of trade deficit which we have in our balance of payment, 35% of that actually comes from one particular country, and that is China. Why such import dependency and such huge negative balance of payment which we are incurring with China is so crucial? Because China, in the case of, let's say for example, a kind of a black swan event where we actually go in a kind of a direct war with China, China can actually end up strangling the critical mineral supply to our country. Not only in the defense sector, but also, let's say for example, in the health sector, where we consider ourselves to be the pharmacy of the world, but majority of the active pharmaceutical ingredients which we are actually importing actually comes from China. For example, in the case of antibiotics, 97% supply of the erythromycin is actually imported from China. If we are saying that we are actually going to create, let's say for example, solar panels, or we are actually going to, let's say for example, promote our electronic vehicles in our country, let's say for example, for which we have a FAME policy, 82% of these solar cells and 75% of lithium ion batteries are actually being imported directly from China. Chances are that the laptop on which you are watching this Analyst right now also has majority of the components which has been sourced from China. Just look at the sector of the electronics. 86% of the flat panels and 80% of the laptops. So don't you think China in this particular case has kind of an extravagant power which can actually strangle our country's energy security? So what has been our country's response? First and foremost, we have also created a kind of a three PSUs have come together, and they have created a kind of a joint venture which is called as Khanij Bidesh Limited, that is KABIL, to actually secure overseas mineral assets. For example, under the flagship of this KABIL, there was recently a memorandum of understanding which was signed between Argentina and India, under which we are actually going to explore lithium reserves in the lithium triangle which exists, that consists of Argentina, Bolivia and Chile. Also, we have joined various international agreements to actually kind of streamline such critical mineral supply, such as for example, Mineral Security Partnership, or for example, Critical Raw Material Framework. Then the Geological Survey of India and the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research is also promoting the circular economy. So let's say for example, if you are using a laptop, the kind of the waste material from that can again be sourced to extract all the important critical mineral, so that we can actually reduce down our import dependency on other countries. Then the production linked incentive scheme also includes the extraction of the critical minerals now. There is 100% foreign direct investment under the automatic route which has been kind of provided for the exploration and the kind of the extraction of such critical mineral. To actually further streamline it, the government amended the Mines and Minerals Act in the year of 2023, where it said that now the private sector is now kind of allowed to actually explore and extract 6 out of 12 atomic minerals, like for example lithium, beryllium, as well as your titanium. All of this you can extract now, even the private sector can do it. Then at the prospective stage of exploration itself, you can actually do the drilling and can also do the subsurface excavation for the early estimation of the potential reserves of minerals, so that the private investment can actually start flowing in this particular sector. The government is also saying that we are going to provide you funding also for these exploration. Please start doing it under the National Mineral Exploration Trust which the government has created. Then let's say for example you want to explore lithium in the Riyasi district of Jammu and Kashmir, and that might be kind of scattered in the different regions of the Riyasi district. So earlier they used to require different licenses for the different blocks or the potential blocks of mineral reserves, but now under one license you can actually do the exploration up to 1000 km square. Also, these mine owners who have kind of extracted some important critical minerals, they are required to sell 50% of such annual mineral excavation, including the coal, in the open market for effective price discovery. Then the government also launched National Critical Mineral Mission of 2024. For what? For fast track regulatory approval process, to provide financial incentive to private companies, to acquire the critical mineral assets abroad, as we are doing in the case of Argentina, to actually enhance our trade with the resource rich countries like for example Australia, which has a rich reserve of uranium, and to create mineral processing parks. We are also going to create Center for Excellence on Critical Minerals for further research on how we can actually streamline the exploration and the extraction of such critical deep-seated minerals from the earth crust. So, also, we are not only limiting ourselves to the territorial region, but we are also diving kind of deep in the ocean as well. For that purpose, we have launched the Deep Ocean Mission for Ocean Exploration, for which we have signed a contract with the International Seabed Authority in 2016, under which we are going to launch an autonomous underwater vehicle, that is Matsya 6000, which will have a kind of a deep sea mining system, where we will target cobalt, nickel, copper, the deposits in ocean floor, like for example copper, zinc, lead, gold and silver. This mission has been termed as a Samudrayan mission, where it will also contain ocean climate advisory services, biodiversity exploration, ocean energy and desalination will also be involved. The major exploration and the excavation is going to be done from the Carlsberg Ridge, which basically is included in the exclusive economic zone of our country, which is the mid-ocean ridge system in the Indian Ocean, which is very rich in such deposits in the ocean floor. So keep these missions in your mind, also from the perspective of the prelims examination. Try to attempt this particular question and we move forward to the next news, where the article highlights that how the development theory that assumed that export expansion is actually going to serve as a kind of a primary bridge from agriculture to mass industrial employment, that stands contradicted as showcased in the regional imbalance which our country is facing, is specifically in the export sector. The issue which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the larger theme of issues related to the Indian economy. So what is the context of the news? The article today highlights that despite a weakening rupee that actually put India in the bracket of Asian countries with the worst performing currency, as our country basically devaluated, the demand for the Indian products actually increased in the foreign market, and thus it benefited our export sector. The economy's export number actually looks impressive in the aggregate. However, the article highlights that a closer reading of this data reveals a far more uneven and structurally revealing story. So when we actually strip it of the national aggregates, the data reveals a kind of a sharp divergence in the performance across region. For example, a rigorous interrogation of the RBI's Handbook of Statistics on Indian state reveals the underlying structural dynamics, where the India's export sector is actually lopsided, where as per the today's article, it gives us a very important key term, and that is that India's export sector's engine is actually being powered by a shrinking cluster of state. To understand that simply, it is basically telling that how, if we are looking at the export growth of our country and we are actually celebrating that yes indeed, as the currency depreciated, our export sector got a kind of a push which it was looking for after the tariff imposition by the USA, this particular growth has been confined to only few states in our country. That we can also understand in technical terms as per the today's article itself by the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, which is a standard metric used to gauge the market concentration, according to which if we refer to the kind of the share of the various states in our export basket, Gujarat with $116 billion of export of services as well as merchandise in the year of 2024 stands at the top and has a share of almost 30%. Maharashtra has a 17% share. Tamil Nadu has a share of 13.4% in our total export basket, and Karnataka has a share of 7.8% in the total export basket of the country. Thus, only 5 states of our country, the top 5 exporting states of our country, they itself constitute for the 75% of the total export basket. 70%, that is more than 2/3. Thus, we can also predict from this particular data that how there is a huge concentration of the export which is taking place in certain state, and majority of them are actually coastal state. Thus, can we say that there are certain regions in our country which remain deprived of such important share in the export basket? The answer is absolutely yes. So first and foremost, let's first try to understand this core to periphery pattern. The article says that basically the export growth story of our country is confined to few states, and thus what we are witnessing is actually hardening of this core to periphery pattern, where the India's export economy is heavily centralized. For example, 4 states, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, constitute 70% of all the merchandise export. Or Gujarat itself has a almost 1/3 share in the merchandise export. In comparison to that, if we refer to the map, for example, this populous state area here, this hinterlands here, the northern part of our country, or the entire northeastern state. So if we refer to these deprived region from the export basket, just look at the data. The populous states like UP, MP, Bihar, which are actually considered as the demographic heartland of the country, they have a meager share of 5% of the total export. In comparison to that, the 8 northeastern states which we have a share of a meager 0.13%. Just look at the share of Gujarat in petroleum product, 67%. In precious stones and jewelry, 36%. Just look at the share of Tamil Nadu in vehicles, almost 21%. Telangana's share in pharmaceutical product is 15%. So don't you think that there are certain reasons which are completely deprived of this growth story? Thus, yes, if our export sector has been benefited, we can also basically predict that there are only certain reasons in certain states which have been benefited from this particular kind of the event which took place. And that is one of the major reason for the kind of the migration which is taking place. Also, why this change in the pattern is actually very important, because if we want to achieve the target which we have set for ourselves under the foreign trade policy. So as per the foreign trade policy 2023, our country has envisaged that we are going to achieve a $1 trillion of merchandise export and service export each. So total $2 trillion of export by the year of 2030. We are actually going to increase our share in the global merchandise trade to 4 to 5% by 2030 and to 3% by 2027. We want to become as a country a kind of a global hub in the sunrise sector. Like for example, creation of the photovoltaic panels as we were discussing. Or for example, creation of the various, let's say for example, the wind energy panels, etc. So in this sunrise sector, we want to achieve a $300 billion in electronics production by 25-26 itself. To also become the leading producer of green hydrogen, solar modules, electric vehicles, and to further integrate the micro, small and medium enterprises into the global value chain. So that is the thing, that when we are actually looking at this map, just look at the India's export growth over the years, where from the year of 2014 to 2024, we have almost witnessed or registered a 67% increase. where our export has significantly increased to America, European Union, Northeast Asia, West Asia, Asian countries, etc. But don't you think this increasing number or this national average actually masks a kind of a deepening regional crisis which we are facing, where there actually exists the kind of the majority of the labor in the form of the high number of demographic dividend in the states like UP, MP and Bihar. They have a kind of an abysmal share in the total number of export which is actually taking place from our country, and that is creating a huge problem which actually makes a change imperative, and that is the regional imbalance in the economic development, which is creating a huge issue of migration, which basically act as a kind of a major push factor, push the workers out of the backward and the resource deprived region to such kind of the export experiencing, high growth experiencing regions and the states. So now you guys can also understand the migration dynamics which exist in our country, where there exists a kind of a sharp rural, urban and regional wage and infrastructure disparities. So it's very obvious that, let's say for example, in these particular regions of UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan or in the northeastern state, there are existence of large scale, small scale industries which are only creating or manufacturing the products for the local economy, and thus they are not integrated to the global supply chain. So the idea of make in India is actually being limited to make for India itself, and we are not making for the world. Thus, in the absence of industrialization, these people in the search of job are actually migrating to the other state, creating huge problem, where we can actually see large scale urban agglomeration which is taking place, leading to what? Proliferation of slum. As per the Confederation of Indian Industry, there exists shortage of almost 10 million houses in the urban cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, etc. Leading to what? Huge traffic congestion, shortage of houses. Almost, as per the report by World Bank, 49% of the urban population of India actually lives in slums, where they're actually kind of deprived of even any meaningful livelihood. Where, as per the World Health Organization, 42 out of the 50 most polluted cities in the world right now actually exist in our country, where there is taking place large scale deforestation in such highly concentrated regions, leading to concretization, and thus there are certain cities in our country which has actually reached to the tipping point. The tipping point is where these countries are actually going to be completely unsustainable. Then such large scale supply of labor in such small concentrated areas of growth is actually leading to an issue which we term as wage depression. So there exists a kind of, in the words of Karl Marx, huge labor supply. And if there is huge labor supply for a small number of jobs, don't you think these workers are actually going to agree to even work below their minimum wage? Why? Because of this huge labor surplus. Further, as the resources are limited and the kind of the job seekers in those particular regions are quite high, it is leading to what? The issue of regionalism. The further proliferation of the son of the soil doctrine, which basically ends up breaking the kind of the fabric of fraternity and brotherhood as enshrined in the Article 51A of the Constitution. Just look at the National Sample Survey 78th round of data. The large scale migration which is taking place from these populous states, where there does not exist large scale industrialization, and thus they do not have a significant share in the export basket of our country. The article provides two major arguments which we are going to discuss. The first is why this divergence is further accelerating. The article tells us that how the modern day economy is actually shifting from the volume production to value based production. So article suggests that there existed a kind of a window for low skill and labor intensive industrialization, which actually allowed countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam to get integrated into the global supply chain. But now that window is actually closing. Why? Because of the rising economic complexity, where, let's say for example, there was earlier 2 or 3 product which was being made by a particular unit of labor in the entire day. But now there is large scale mechanization where we can actually create 5 or 6 such unit of commodities and without the use of any unit of labor itself. If we are removing the labor, we are not only cutting the input cost, also we are not required to provide them all of these social security net. And thus, as the input cost is going to actually cut down drastically, that basically translates into the further profit maximization, and that is the concept of economic complexity, where the global economy is now more focusing upon more diverse and tightly connected export basket for what? For high value production. And the kind of production chain or supply chain which exists in our country, which is called as sparsely connected peripheral areas, they are actually facing steep barriers for the structural upgrading. Let's try to understand that by taking the example of the cotton supply chain in our country. So cotton, which is actually basically grown in the black soil region of our country, like for example Gujarat, Maharashtra, in the belts of Andhra Pradesh, etc. So when the cottons is produced there, it is basically first sourced and brought to the cotton yarn production, let's say for example in the districts of Tamil Nadu. So the raw cotton is brought here. Then the small skill labor industries which actually exist, they get involved. They turn them into the cotton yarn. From these cotton yarn, it is further actually kind of exported to various other units in other states where there are micro small industries which actually produces the cotton fabric. Then this cotton fabric further again goes to the ports like for example Kandla in Gujarat and JNPT in Mumbai, and from there it is further exported to then be produced as a kind of a finished product in other country. Don't you think that such large scale complex supply chain which exists in the country, it actually involves a lot of labor, a lot of intermediaries, which also makes it prone to a large scale corruption. You need to require to pay a lot of duties and taxes at various juncture, thus increasing the overall input cost itself. So instead of focusing on such sparsely connected peripheral areas of which are actually kind of facing a huge barrier to structural upgrading, now the global economies are actually focusing on export basket for high value production, where all of this, the production of cotton is within the proximity of the cotton yarn production. The cotton yarn is being produced and immediately being, let's say for example, sent to the another production unit where the cotton fabric is being produced, and very near to that there is kind of the last stage finishing line as well, which is creating the product right there to actually reduce the input cost, to have the less requirement of labor. And this is also rising because of the rising phenomena of kind of the closed market economy which is developing in the world. Thus, as per the World Trade Organization, there is already taking place a kind of a structural slowing of the merchandise trade volume. That growth has already declined by almost 0.5 to 3%. As per the UNCTAD 2023 report, the top 10 global exporters, they already control 55% of the merchandise trade, and thus they are much more focusing upon such high value production instead of high volume production. The second argument which has been given by the today's article, that why this divergence is further accelerating between such high exporting states as well as those states which has meager share in the export basket. The first reason is that now the companies are actually focusing more on the capital rather than on the worker. For example, as per the annual survey of industries 2022-23 data, the investment in the fixed capital that increased by 10.6%, but in comparison to that, the total employment percentage in that year only increased by 7.4%. Why? Because now the companies are actually replacing this labor from the large scale capital investment in technological upgradation. Now you guys can also study from ChatGPT. If you will start reading from the newspaper there itself, obviously that will not provide you such kind of a lucid and fluent and great explanation like it is being provided here. But don't you think that can actually end up replacing one labor unit here also? Second, fixed capital per person engaged, that has risen to almost 23.6 lakh. So what they are investing in one person, and in comparison to that, the amount which they are investing in capital, that is almost 23.6 lakh rupees. Thus, the companies are now actually focusing the factory floor is becoming more expensive and less labor absorptive. So basically now we are actually focusing more on the export of value rather than on the volume of employment, and thus worker is becoming less central to the entire production process itself. We can see that. For example, if we refer to India Skill Report 2024, 54% of the total graduates that year were actually completely unemployable. What does this particular data entails? This data tells us that how, let's say for example, there were almost 46% of the people who graduated and only they were capable enough to get a job there in the industry 4.0. 54% of them did not even had the sufficient skill to get the job. As again, as we can see, the factory floor is now actually becoming more expensive because of the installation of more capital in the form of technology upgradation there. So there is no more requirement of the labor, which is anyway unskilled, to work in the industry 4.0. As per the report itself, there existed 60 to 70% skill gap in the various machine learning engineer, data scientists, etc. Thus, if we refer to the nominal gross value addition in the quarter 2 of the year 2025, the primary sector or agriculture contributed to 14%, the tertiary sector or service sector contributed to 60% almost, and the share of manufacturing sector was only 26%. Even if there is kind of the production linked incentive scheme which has been launched by the government, if there is a kind of a PLI driven surge in the electronic export, which was almost 47%, that has also remained concentrated in some technological hubs like for example in Kachipuram or Noida. And even when we are talking about the kind of the capital investment which is being done, the gross fixed capital formation growth is actually due to the high government capital expenditure and not by the private sector. The idea is that government cannot sustain it for a long period of time because the government is now following a fiscal consolidation path as per the budget 2025, where the government is saying that we are going to bring down our fiscal deficit to 4.5% of GDP by the year of 2026. So, what are the steps which has been taken? What are the initiatives by the government of India? First and foremost, the idea is to make this labor ready for industry 4.0 as well as 5.0, and for that purpose the government is providing them skilling under the Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Further, the government is saying that okay, you want to invest only on technology, only on capital, you do not want to do that much of investment on labor, no problem. We are going to actually provide you incentive to hire the new, let's say for example, employees in the particular sector. For that purpose, the government has launched employment linked incentive scheme, where there is a kind of an incentive which is being provided by the government itself to the employer. Second, under the PLI scheme, now we are basically targeting certain sectors in the underdeveloped regions, like for example, silk cluster in Bhagalpur in Bihar or handloom sector in the Gaya district of Bihar. Similarly, to actually cut the import, the government is actually now picking items from the local manufacturers. There is kind of a innovation or the integration of technology which is actually being done even in the primary sector to create more jobs. We can take the case study of UP here, where under a World Bank and a Google partnership program, Uttar Pradesh actually became the world's first pilot site where artificial intelligence actually transformed the outcomes for smallholder farmers. Just see, to boost small farmers' productivity, to enhance urban governance, to actually empower the various care and the events in UP. Also, the government is further creating infrastructure in the backward district under the aspirational district program, as well as infrastructure in the northeast state under the Northeast Special Infrastructure Development Scheme. So remember all of these provisions when you are writing this answer, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to read about a very important concept for both prelims and mains, and that is the maternal mortality ratio. What is the context of the news? So the rate of institutional deliveries in our country has increased to 89%. So basically 89% pregnant women in our country are now giving birth in either private or government hospital, which has led to a significant reduction in the maternal mortality ratio as per our Minister of Health and Family Welfare. And thus the government is striving through its healthcare services to ensure that citizens remain healthy and do not fall ill in the first place. First and foremost, what do we mean by the maternal mortality rate or ratio? It is basically calculated as a death of a particular woman while giving the birth, or while she was pregnant, or after 42 days of pregnancy. So as per the recent estimate by the National Family Health Survey 5, which provides us the data, India's current maternal mortality ratio stands at 93 per 1 lakh women. So still there are 93 women per 1 lakh women which actually succumbs to death while they are pregnant or giving living birth or 42 days after the termination of pregnancy. Then, as per the same NFHS 5, 57% of our country's women between the age of 15 to 49 are anemic, which basically implies that they have less number of red blood cells and less number of iron dissolution in red blood cells. Keep this in mind that these red blood cells play a very pivotal role in the supply of oxygen to your tissues. So which is the state with the highest maternal mortality ratio in our country? That is Madhya Pradesh, where 175 per 1 lakh women actually dies while the pregnancy or while giving birth. As per the World Health Report of 2024, one maternal death occurs in our country almost every 2 minutes, and that was what taking place in the year of 2023. So the issue or why this particular issue prevails in our country, what are the causes of such prevailing high maternal mortality rate? As per the Sustainable Development Goal target, we have decided that we are going to reduce this maternal mortality ratio to 70 by the year of 2030. The one and the very prominent factor for that is the poor status of health infrastructure which exists in our country. To understand that, we can actually take up a case study provided to us by the National Health Authority survey of 2022 to 2023, according to which in the state of Madhya Pradesh, there existed almost 80% villages which were either 5 or more than 5 kilometers away from the nearest primary health care, where a woman can actually go, have a checkup, take some immunization. The second major reason is the medical illiteracy which prevails in the rural areas, where there are still certain existence of the patriarchal norms. These patriarchal norms basically leads to various social taboos and stereotypes which actually ends up preventing the institutional birth which shall be given by these women. Let's say that there is a woman living in such rural hamlet where there is still existence of such patriarchal norms, but she watches Analyst on daily basis. And thus by the virtue of it, she has actually become very knowledgeable about her rights under Article 21 of the Constitution. So she basically wants to deliver her baby in a kind of a government hospital. But for that purpose, as she does not have access to any job, she is entirely financially dependent on her husband or on her in-laws for such important decision. As per the female labor force participation rate which is provided to us by the periodic labor force survey, it exists at 41%. Through this we can actually imply that there exist 59% of women who are entirely financially dependent on in-laws. They cannot make such decisions by themselves. Also keep this in mind that out of this 41%, only 18% of women in our country actually have access to any kind of formal employment, where they get actually benefits like Maternity Benefit Act of 1961. Otherwise, there are certain, let's say for example, a female laborer, even if she is 5 months, 6 months pregnant, you will still see her kind of, taking the bricks to make a house in which you are living comfortably. 75% of these pregnant and lactating mothers actually suffer from insufficient calorie and protein intake. And then you guys can recall from the last lecture where we also discussed about the prevalence of the child marriage in our country, and that basically translates into the issue of child brides. So as per the World Health Organization, it basically prescribes that a healthy age to give birth for a woman is 22 to 35. Any such adolescence, pregnancy or giving birth to a child in the adolescence age, that is before the age of 20 years, can actually lead to eclampsia, various kind of infections, and even preterm birth, which is kind of have a detrimental impact on the health of the child itself. But the Minister of Health and Family Welfare have basically highlighted the steps which has been taken by the government of India to actually tackle this issue of high MMR. One of them actually is the Janani Suraksha Yojana and Matru Vandana Yojana, through which we can actually see that how the non-institutional delivery, which was approximately 74% in the year of 1996, has significantly declined to just being 11%. So basically 89% of the pregnant women in our country are now giving birth in either private or a government hospital. What are the steps taken by the government? Also very important for the prelims examination. First and foremost is the Janani Suraksha Yojana. In Janani Suraksha Yojana, through the platform of any private healthcare or a government hospital, 1400 rupees is provided to a woman who is pregnant in urban area and 1000 rupees in the rural area. Let's say, for example, if you are an SC and ST woman, then you can avail such kind of a monetary benefit from the government in both low and high performing state. But if you are living in urban area, then you should be coming from a below poverty line household. Then only you can avail such monetary benefit in high performing state. Only if you are above the age of 19 years, because the government is against child marriage. Also, it is basically it's a kind of an incentivizing the family planning, as you can avail such monetary benefit only up to 2 live birth. Then there is your Matra Vandana Yojana, under which the government provides maternity benefit to pregnant and lactating mother. So 5000 rupees are provided in 3 installment. First 1000 rupees is given to you under the registration itself. Then after 6 months, when you come for antenatal checkup, you are provided with another 2000 rupees. And further after the childbirth, when you kind of secure 100% immunization to your child and yourself, another 2000 rupees is provided to you. Just look here, under this Janani Suraksha Yojana and Janani Shishu Suraksha Karyakram, over 25,000 delivery points has been created. Over 102 free transport services has been operationalized, leading to the increasing institutional birth to almost 89%. Further, there are certain steps which has been taken by the government to further increase the women health care. One of them is SUMAN, that is Surakshit Matritva Ashwasan. Under this, let's say for example, there is a pregnant woman and she comes to a primary healthcare center and you are the doctor of it. So now you shall mandatorily provide her free health checkup, free immunization, and if you fail to do so, there will be a heavy penalty which will be charged upon you. Second, under the Surakshit Matritva Abhiyan, on every 9th day of the month, there will be a kind of a prenatal checkup program which will be conducted in the rural areas, as well as immunization will be provided. Then further, let's say if the government or woman trusted the government and said, okay, I will have my delivery in the government hospital only. The government is also trying to, kind of make sure that their trust is paid, and thus the government is basically kind of improving the infrastructure in the labor room in various government hospital under Laksh initiative. Further, to keep a check on the efficacy of the government's response, the government is actually tracking the kind of the performance of the initiatives under the maternal death surveillance and response portal, as well as reproductive and child health portal. Also, the government has launched Anemia Mukt Bharat Abhiyan, where the target is to actually make our women completely anemia free by the year of 2047. Whenever you guys are writing on the health sector, always you can write a way forward using the Bijoy Chakravarti 2018 committee, which actually suggested to expand the efficiency of insurance and digital healthcare to tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which ultimately led the government to launch the Ayushman Bharat Yojana. Also, to provide robust primary and secondary healthcare in the rural areas, to actually reduce curative care load at the tertiary level. And for that purpose, we can also integrate the new concept of telemedicine with the use of artificial intelligence. As we were talking about the medical illiteracy which prevails in the rural area, we can actually adopt the model which was provided by the Finland's health education model, where health education is compulsory from the primary stage of education itself. So basically they are focusing more on the kind of the precaution rather than curative care. Keep all of these points in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to learn about the rhinos today. Why the rhinos has been in the news? Because a very interesting article today appeared in the science section of the Hindu, where it talked about that how once upon a time the thunder of the hooves of lakhs of mighty rhinoceros actually echoed across the savanna forest, grasslands and the tropical forest of Africa and Asia, but things have gotten pretty quiet lately. As of 2024, fewer than 28,000 rhinos actually remain on the planet, all 5 species of the rhinos combined. So, the article basically talks about the one approach that has actually been taken in the greater Kruger region. The approach that has shown a promise is dehorning of the rhino. An international team of researchers recently collected data over 7 years from 11 reserves in the South African portion of the Greater Kruger region and found out that dehorning actually significantly reduced the poaching incidents. So let's first try to understand from the prelims perspective, where is this Greater Kruger region? This Greater Kruger region is basically a large integrated wildlife conservation landscape which basically expands to 2 countries. So it includes the Kruger National Park, which is entirely in South Africa, and the Limpopo National Park, which is in Mozambique. This Greater Kruger region, this large-scale integrated wildlife conservation landscape also boundaries the Okavango Delta of Botswana and Masai Mara of Kenya. You guys might have heard Ranbir Kapoor and Alia Bhatt. In every interview they keep on talking about this Masai Mara of Kenya. So this Greater Kruger region is actually home to the big 5 species which are lion, leopard, elephant, buffalo and rhino. Earlier during the colonial times, it also basically included the private game reserves like Sabi Sands, Timbawati, Thorny Bush, etc. Why? Why this concept of dehorning has been launched? Because some perceive rhino horns as status symbols and they are also basically used in traditional medicine. So what is this obsession with the rhino's horn? First and foremost is keep this in mind that these rhino horns are actually made up of keratin, the same fibrous protein which is found in the hair and nails. So there exists a kind of an unproven myth till now that if we are basically going to consume such horns of the rhino, it is actually going to kind of keep you young as well as kind of prevent your hair fall. I hope all of you are not running now to the Greater Kruger region. Second, it is actually thus used by the practitioners of traditional medicine in China and the Vietnam region. And it is also basically collected as a trophy and it acts as a kind of a status symbol for the various elites. Thus, as per the Wildlife Justice Commission report of 2022, in the last decade from 2012 to 2022, there was kind of a gross illicit income of almost $1.13 billion by the illegal cutting and the sale of such rhino's horn. The question which shall arise in your mind is that okay, there might be certain people who want to achieve such elite status by having horns in their drawing rooms. But why the poachers actually do that? The dehorning against the poaching, so first and foremost the major reason for that is the poverty which prevails in the local communities that creates a financial pressure. In simple Hindi, पापी पेट के लिए बहुत सारी चीजें करनी पड़ती हैं. So the people, the researchers, they basically applied a method. The method was Bayesian regression modeling method, where they actually started realizing that if we are going to dehorn the rhino, so there is a kind of a germinal line. If you cut the horn above that, the horn can basically grow up. But poachers do not have that much of a time, right? They are basically there to do such illegal activity. So they basically end up killing the rhino first and then they cut the horn. So what these researchers are doing, they are basically dehorning the rhinos right above that germinal layer from where it can actually grow up again. They found out that it actually led to 75% reduction in the poaching events. And that is actually more effective than catching the poacher because the kind of the corruption in the system and the weak criminal justice system. You guys can see the greater Kruger region here. This is your South Africa, this is your Mozambique, this is your Great Limpopo Transfrontier Park, and this is your Kruger National Park, which is in the South Africa. Keep this in your mind. Here is your Timbawati Game Reserve as the Sabi Sand Reserve as well. Now, just a small information about the Kaziranga National Park, because it also appears in the article that how such dehorning initiative was also taken in the Kaziranga. The Kaziranga National Park, which is also one of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, expands in the two districts of Golaghat and Nagaon and contains, keep this in mind, 75% of the population of the one-horned rhino. Also contains the largest population of the Asiatic water buffalo and the largest population of the eastern range of swamp deer. As you guys can see in the map, this is your Brahmaputra river. Here is your Dibru Sekhoa. Here is your Dehing Patkai. Here is your Nameri National Park, Orang. On the south, here lies your Kaziranga as well as Ramona National Park, which is also on the north if you clearly see in the map, as well as the Manas. So this south of Brahmaputra river, Kaziranga National Park basically contains of wet alluvial tall grasslands and semi-evergreen woodland kind of a vegetation. Where some specific information about the India's one-horned rhinos, 75% of its population which is found entirely in Kaziranga. On IUCN, it is listed as vulnerable in the Appendix 1 of CITES and in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, and thus one-horned rhino has the highest level of legal protection. Over 75% of world's population is in our country itself, and India hosts more than 3,700 plus rhino, which major habitat being Kaziranga, Pobitora, Manas, Orang as well as Jaldapara National Park in the region of West Bengal. And for the protection of these rhinos, the government has launched various initiatives like, for example, the National Rhino Conservation Strategy of 2019, the India Rhino Vision of 2020, the anti-poaching measures in Kaziranga as well as the DNA profiling which was done by the Ministry of Environment, and as you guys can see the result of it, the population has significantly increased in the Kaziranga itself. Keep all of these facts related to one-horned rhino very dear to you, Kruger National Park in your mind, and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to study about the heaviest ever launch of a satellite which is going to be conducted by ISRO. What is the context of the news? The Indian Space Research Organization is scheduled to launch the Launch Vehicle 3 rocket carrying its heaviest ever satellite, that is Bluebird Block 2, which will be weighing around 6,100 kgs, making it the heaviest payload carried by ISRO. Remember that this LVM-3 is also going to be used in the launch of the Gaganyaan mission, which is going to be India's first crewed space mission. The satellite will be injected into an orbit of around 520 km, and this Bluebird Block 2 satellite will be the largest ever commercial communication satellite to be deployed in the low Earth orbit. As the name suggests, the low Earth orbit is an orbit that is relatively close to the Earth's surface. The satellite, which has been designed by the US company AST Space Mobile, where it will actually provide direct to the mobile connectivity. So normally what the satellite does, they basically kind of reflect the signal to a kind of a ground station, and then that ground station connects that internet to your mobile. But in this particular case, the kind of the internet connectivity or the signal will be directly reflected in your mobile, and thus as per ISRO chief, it is going to provide 4G, 5G voice and video calls for everyone, everywhere at all time. Why India's LVM-3 was actually chosen? It was chosen after the refusal by Russia due to the Ukraine war as well as the European Space Agency's Ariane, which has now become decommissioned. It is very important for our country. Why? Because there is also alternatives which existed, like for example SpaceX Falcon or Ariane 6 of European Space Agency, but ISRO has promised that it is going to deliver such heavy launches at a very lower cost. We have already done that. 2 such commercial flights before itself. This is going to be the 3rd commercial flight of this Launch Vehicle 3, which is basically contains a very powerful cryogenic engine. So earlier we used to kind of use a C-28 stage. Now we have upgraded this cryogenic engine, which basically contains the fuel and provides the velocity, to a C-32 stage, which now can contain 32,000 kgs of fuel and almost provide 50% of the velocity to place such satellites in the geosynchronous transfer orbit. So what is this LVM-3? What is this Bahubali rocket? So first and foremost, keep this in mind that there are various kind of launch vehicles which our ISRO has. Like for example, small satellite launch vehicle for satellites weighing up to 500 kg, which we basically use to place the satellites into low Earth orbit at an altitude of about 500 km. Then we have a polar satellite launch vehicle, where it is ideal for remote sensing, Earth observation and scientific mission for a payload of about 1750 kg. Then we have a geostationary launch vehicle, which we actually use and also has a cryogenic upper stage, which is used for carrying heavier satellites of about 2200 kg. And then we have an LVM-3. So even though the launch is only going to be in the low Earth orbit or LEO, but the weight of the satellite is quite a lot, and that's why we are using LVM-3, which is actually used to kind of lift the launch vehicles with carrying capacity of more than 4000 kg. Main vehicle for communication satellite as well as crewed missions like Gaganyaan. Keep this in mind in the context of this Bluebird Block 2, that before this ISRO also used the same LVM-3 or the Bahubali rocket to actually launch the communication satellite 3. CMS-03, which was the heaviest communication satellite which was launched from the Indian soil, that was 4410 kg, that weight. But if they will ask you, the heaviest satellite which has been ever launched before this one, that was GSAT-11 by ISRO, and that weighed 5854 kg. Again, what is the geosynchronous orbit? Under which, as you can see in this particular kind of a diagram, there are various orbits which has been kind of mapped for you. For example, the low Earth orbit. Then there is your medium Earth orbit, and this is your geostationary orbit. The geostationary orbit has a kind of a low inclination orbit about Earth, having a period of around 23 hours, 56 minutes and 4 seconds, which remain above the Earth at a constant longitude, not latitude, longitude, and returns to the same point in the sky at same time each day. Then there also exists a kind of a transitional orbit which is called as GTO, which revolves from, as you can see from the map, from the perigee to the kind of the apogee. The fuel efficiency and use onboard fuel for the final adjustment, and then the transitional orbit, say basically we can switch to the kind of this geosynchronous orbit. So keep these specific orbits in your mind, keep these specific satellites in your mind, and we move forward to the next news, where very briefly we are going to learn about the Fugitive Economic Offender Act. Why it has appeared in the news? Because the Bombay High Court on Tuesday asked the fugitive businessman Vijay Mallya that when he intended to come back to India. While hearing his plea challenging the invocation of the Fugitive Economic Offender Act, where the enforcement directorate of our country has alleged that Mallya has committed a bank fraud of over 6,200 crore rupees with an outstanding liability of nearly 15,000 crore, which includes the interest, and therefore his plea challenging the provisions of the Fugitive Economic Offender Act cannot be heard in his absence. So please come back to India. The agency said he must submit to the judicial process in our country. First and foremost, the question shall in your mind, who is a fugitive economic offender? So, such FEO is defined under the section 2 clause 1 of the Fugitive Economic Offender Act of 2018, under which, let's say for example, you have done a kind of a fraud, or you have not returned the amount from the people you have taken the loan, or from the banks which you have taken loan, and that amount is more than 100 crore rupees, and then you have taken a simple step where you just simply left our country to avoid the criminal prosecution. Then the enforcement directorate will go to a special court and will file an application, and if that application is submitted by the special court that yes indeed the charges seems to be reasonable, then you are basically labeled as a fugitive economic offender. Also, How can a fugitive economic offender can be actually brought back to our country? There is not one. There is your Mehul Choksi also. We are keep on asking from about his extradition from various country. So such particular person can be brought back to our country through various methods. First and foremost is if we have such extradition treaty or a bilateral agreement with that particular country where this particular person is residing. Second, if such Interpol red corner notice has been issued against that person, or if we have a mutual legal assistance treaty with that country, or if we can we can actually create diplomatic pressure and the asset freezing of the accused person. So, does India have any law on extradition? Yes, indeed. We have Extradition Act of 1962, which actually provides for a dual criminality principle. So, the offense can be extradited only if the crime, whatever the particular Vijay Mallya has done, that can be considered as a crime in both India as well as the requesting country. This applies to the foreign state with which India has extradition treaty and certain non-treaty states as well on the basis of reciprocal arrangements. India currently has extradition treaty with 48 countries. For example, you guys can recall how we were discussing about the Sheikh Hasina incident, that how there is a demand to extradite Sheikh Hasina from our country, right? There was a special court which has passed such order. But India and Bangladesh has signed such extradition treaty in 2030, which actually allows for such extradition based on police warrant as well as without requiring any full evidence. But keep this in mind that under the extradition treaty of 1962, the Act of 1962, the offense, this such extradition can be rejected by our country if the offense is political in the nature, or if there exists a chance of unfair trial, and that is exactly the same provision which is actually being kind of utilized by Vijay Mallya to actually stay in London. Keep this in mind. He is also giving the same excuses there also, that there can be like I am being framed politically. So now you can recall the kind of the podcast which he did, and he kept on saying that I am actually being framed because of the political rivalry, as well as he's basically kind of argues there that there exists a chance of unfair trial, that I am going to be victimized. Keep this Extradition Act of 1962 in your mind, and we move forward to the last news of the day, where we are going to study about a very important science award which featured in the news today, called as Rashtriya Vigyan Puraskar of 2025. A national award which has been actually instituted by the government of India to recognize the contribution of the researchers in the field of science and technology and innovation. So it is taking place only for the second time. The first time it was actually given in the 2024, a day ahead of the National Space Day. The National Space Day, which we celebrate on 23rd of August. The task for the day is to find out and comment in the comment box, if anyone can recall correctly without the help of ChatGPT please, why we celebrate National Space Day on 23rd of August also. So there is actually will take place first the scrutiny by a 17-member panel, which will be headed by the principal scientific advisor. The final selection will lie in the hand of the Minister of Science and Technology. So there are 4 categories of award, keep this in your mind. First is your Vigyan Ratna, which is given as a lifetime achievement and contribution in the field of science and technology. As for example, it has been given to this year to the Professor Jayant Vishnu Narlikar for the lifetime contribution to the cosmology and gravitational physics, especially for the Hoyle-Narlikar theory, which reshaped the understanding of the universe. Then Vigyan Shri, to distinguished contribution in any field of science and technology. Vigyan Yuva Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize, which is basically given to some young scientists, typically up to the age of 45 years. So I think many of you might be disqualified, who have made exceptional contribution, and then to a particular team itself, which consists of 3 or more innovators who have worked collaboratively. On whose name this particular Vigyan Yuva Award has been taken from, that is Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, who is actually considered as the father of research laboratories in our country and acted as the first Director General of the CSIR, where he actually conducted a kind of a pioneer research on the colloids, the substance with particle dispersed throughout the another substance, like for example milk or fog, where he also discovered innovative methods to use Indian bauxite, clay and minerals for industrial chemicals, and gave a Bhatnagar-Mathur magnetic interference, which is very important to measure the magnetic properties of the materials. These are various awardees of Vigyan Shri, Vigyan Yuva or Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Prize of this particular year of the Rashtriya Vigyan Puraskar. And with this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. Till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.